It is time now for Money Power Politics. The market soared today when the president stepped back from more tariffs on Europe after reaching what is he is calling the framework of a future deal on Greenland. Those tariffs were expected to take effect in less than 2 weeks, which set off a disastrous day for markets, where all three major indices suffered some of their worst losses we have seen in months. But it is unclear whether this olive branch is too little or too late for European leaders. Only hours before the president's announcement, the EU officially halted approval of a U.S. trade deal. A European official also told MS Now that retaliatory tariffs were still under consideration. Our nightcap is still here. All right, Dan, you say this was not about the markets, but let's just go back in history. Because last year on Liberation Day, it was when Trump was imposing the big tariffs. It wasn't business leaders or world leaders. It was the bond market cracking and people saying, dude, this could be a disaster for us. And he backed off. So what did we just have in the last 24 hours? Basically, the same thing happened. While he's supposed to be talking about housing affordability, if mortgages are suddenly costing you a whole lot more money, if Europe, which maybe is not, he doesn't consider a military foe, which they're not, but if they suddenly say, we're going to dump all of our treasuries and buy none in the future, that would hurt. To me, today showed that, yet again, the market is his daddy.
Yeah, the EU doesn't own a lot of our debt right now. So if you think about it, it's Japan, it's China, it's a whole host of other countries that are not the EU, right? So that's one thing. And I guess if you want to go back to April, I can't use that term that you just used about April 2nd when the tariffs were rolled out. It was abrupt. It was sloppy. It was far worse than a lot of folks thought it was going to be. So the uncertainty of that really kind of threw not just our markets based on what might happen to our economy, but the global economy. Now, you used the term taco before. We know what the playbook is, right? And if you think about it, markets and also economies have gotten comfortable over the last, call it 9 or 10 months with this sort of behavior. So now, all of a sudden, if you have a meaningful threat, not of military action, of 10% tariffs across the board, you can do the math, right? That might be a drag of 1% on our GDP. And if you're a market participant, then you start calculating where things should be trading. What is the valuation? We also had a period where we were just trading at all-time highs about a week ago, right? There's a lot of complacency in the market, and especially in the beginning of the year, it doesn't take much to hit the sell button, right? And that's really what happened. So here we are today. I mean, if you looked at your market screen today, as soon as that tweet went out, the market went up in a straight line, like in a straight line. You don't see that too often. So again, we might be making new all-time highs in just, I don't know, a few hours or so, if you guys are checking the overnight market. So I just think that we're at a place right now where market participants, they know what the playbook is, and they're going to continue to do, basically assuming that he will back down whenever there's
okay, but if you had to say, what was Donald Trump's #1 economic policy of 2025? It's the tariffs. At what point does he start to back off, right? He announces them or floats them yesterday. The market falls out of bed. Today, one of the biggest investors and Republican mega donors, Ken Griffin, says on not just national TV, says in front of the world in Davos, the tariffs impacted American businesses and American consumers. At what point does Trump say, I know it makes me feel good to have this magic wand and have people come and say, please, sir, stop this, but it doesn't help this country in any way?
It's the polls showing Americans think the economy is terrible. The polls showing Americans think that inflation is worse. And now study after study saying these aren't tariffs, these are taxes on American consumers. American consumers are paying these tariffs. And that's a real political challenge as we approach the midterm elections. And it's the economy, stupid. So
okay,
he should realize that he's got a problem here in changing people's perceptions, and that constantly waving the tariff wand hasn't really worked through his first year in office.
But does he? Because you cover politics. Is he that focused on the midterms? Because here we are in Davos, right, where you do have all the world leaders, but Larry Fink, who's the chairman of Davos himself, said it is so disconnected from the world, maybe next year it should be, I don't know, maybe he said Boise, Idaho, right? It's sort of like these remarks in Davos, like kind of epitomize the K-shaped economy, right? You had Scott Bessent yesterday when talking about, changing policies so big institutional buyers can't buy swaths of homes. He was then talking about, people for their retirement, owning 5, 10, 12 homes. How disconnected are these policies and the vision of this administration from what the actual American experience is? It makes me wonder, they don't seem to be focused on the midterms. Maybe they don't. They're making so much damn money for themselves.
Well, I'll tell you, they said they were going to be. I mean, I asked.
Yeah, they were going to do it.
I ran a preview of this Davos
tour.
speech this morning. You called the White House last night and you say, what is this speech going to be about in Davos? What's he going to say? They said affordability. That's the focus. The focus is going to be affordability. We're going to talk about affordability. And, you know, 2 weeks ago, he posted on his own social media network, we're going to talk about housing prices at Davos. Stay tuned for that. There's like a tiny little minute of that. The Republican caucus in Congress desperately wants him to turn to the midterms and talk about the economy and talk about this stuff. And the problem is the administration really wants to talk about their legacy, which they want to be these big things like Greenland and Venezuela, et cetera. Those two things are now on parallel tracks. And it's becoming an increasingly big problem in comical ways, like this thing where they said to you, the speech is going to be about affordability. It barely even came up as a concept.
But it kind of shouldn't, right? If you're speaking in Davos to a room full of world leaders.
No, I disagree, because the idea was, the pitch was, he's going to go to these corporate leaders. He's going to tell them, hey, you guys buying all these private houses with your big private equity firms, no more of that. He's going to talk to them. He's going to be this populist, talking right to these business leaders right in their face. Right?
He doesn't need to go to Davos for it. He could tap Steve Schwartzman on a golf course in Palm Beach.
Fair enough.
Or you could talk at Mar-a-Lago. That's where you would get the most benefit there. I can't believe that was the actual pitch, because the speech was nothing like that at all.
It was an 8-minute speech.
Yeah.
And he did not get to housing until minute 65.
He does not care about affordability. This is not happening in his circle. He is significantly more insulated than he was in term one. He's around people in Mar-a-Lago telling him he's the greatest of all time. People telling him their stock portfolios are high. He doesn't care about this. And you're right. He's on the top of that K-shaped economy. Meanwhile, he wants to keep these tariffs in place because, like you pointed out in your show this week, he sees it as leverage. He's using it as a weapon, and kind of like sanctions, frankly, is how he's using these tariffs. He sees them as a way to wield power. And right now, whenever he feels weak, because, I don't want to psychologically analyze him too much, but his egomania requires him to exert this power. And at home, he's politically weak. The economy, we saw those really slow months of job growth last year. We see inflation persist. We see
the economy is not in trouble. People don't feel good about it, but our underlying economy is not in trouble.
Yeah, it's not in trouble, but the people are feeling the pain. And last time someone told the people that the economy was better than it was, didn't go well for them electorally.
That's a great point. Listen, many people are not feeling the economy, but the president in this term is surrounded by what we're going to look back on, surrounded by people who are basically becoming American oligarchs.
Yeah, another CEO was in Davos is speaking. And again, like Larry Fink, as you just mentioned, I mean, this is the largest asset manager in the world. This is BlackRock. Okay, so Jamie Dimon is the CEO of the largest bank in the world. They have a huge credit portfolio, right? So a lot of credit cards. So the president is making this populist move to cap interest rates. We can all agree that would be absolutely amazing, but it's not something that you can just kind of wave a magic wand. Jamie Dimon was very specific about this. He said, okay, go try to do that in Massachusetts and Vermont, okay, where Senator Warren and, right, so we all get that, right? It wouldn't work right now anyway, because you would have much lower credit access by a consumer that really needs to have access to it. And what does that mean if you're not going out and shopping in Target, or you're not going to your local restaurant, that sort of thing? So it's not going to happen. And I think it is about politics over policy. None of this policy is going to be enacted. And if you look at the language,
what do you mean none of this policy?
Well, like for instance, the credit card thing is going to be for a year. Yeah. Like for a year, right? They'll get us to January 2027. So we get it, whether his people get it. The die-hard MAGA folks, they're not going to believe it, because when they go to the grocery store, they recognize that prices are still really high. When they go to look and try to find a home, whether it's rent or buy, they realize that it's out of
or healthcare,
that sort of thing. When they go, and that's one thing I got to tell you. You can talk about this tax bill, you can talk about the benefits that it's going to have for lots of Americans. There's no way it won't be basically at least matched by 20 million Americans who've had to make a decision to actually have health care, or run the risk of needing to do it and then being wiped out to get it, that sort of thing.
Last word to you.
Just Americans don't feel like the country's working. They don't feel like, buying a home, a college education, the healthcare system. The digital age is here, and there's no control, no privacy, no regulation at all. And no party is addressing that. I mean, again, the president ran on America first, and he spent particularly the last part of this year talking about Gaza, Iran, Venezuela, bombing Nigeria and Somalia, talking about ending wars, between Vietnam and Thailand, or I can't get the country straight. And it's so off message. And he is a skilled politician, but the midterms are coming. Americans don't see a president focused on them or solving their problems.